How do you shade anime hair? I'll go over this process step by step, and the end result will be a simple but effective hair shading. All you need to follow along is a pencil and airbrush tool. These are the colors I'll be using for this example, and the number at the bottom of the screen indicates the current color in use. Create a new layer and then clip it to your base color layer. Choose the pencil at stock settings with a hard edge and taper at the tip. Using the first color, draw lines to separate the larger groups of hair, such as the bangs, side hair, and back hair. The best way to do this is to start at the root of the hair from the top and then move downwards, following the flow of the hair. If you have already done these separations during the line art stage, you can skip this step. Now let's do the first shading layer. Create a new layer and clip it to the layer below. Set the opacity down to 40% and pick the second color. With the pencil, draw shadows away from the light source. Since the light source in this example is directly above the head, most of the shading will be down at the tips and beneath hanging pieces of hair. In this example, the art style is less complicated, so the amount of shading will be kept to a minimum. You should follow the flow of the hair and draw carefully while maintaining balance across the hair. To make this easier, you can use the lines we drew in the previous step as guiding points to decide where to place certain lines. You can flip the canvas now and then to make sure that the balance is on point and that all the large groups of hair have gotten enough shading. Moving on to the next step. Create a new layer and clip it to the layer below. This time, set the opacity down to 90% and pick the third color. With the pencil tool, shade the darkest areas of the hair. These are usually the underside of the hair and small gaps between pieces of hair where the light doesn't reach through. In this case, I can just cover the entire back of the hair in one stroke. Afterwards, move on to the small gaps and add small lines in the areas where the larger hairs intersect or overlap. There is no need to overdo this step, as these smaller shadows are barely noticeable. However, they still do add a bit of depth to the overall illustration. Next up are the highlights. For this step, the color used will be a basic white color. On a new layer, draw an arc across the hair and then adjust it to the curvature of the head. Afterwards, switch the color from white to transparent and use the pencil to shave away dents into the highlight. Follow the flow of the hair while keeping an eye on the overall shape and curve. The main point here is to use the pencil tool as a sort of eraser to create wave-shaped patterns across the hair. We use the pencil instead of an eraser since shape, size variation and anti-aliasing matches better with the shading that we did earlier. Reduce layer opacity temporarily to see the lines beneath. Doing so makes it easier to see where to erase or draw. Also, highlights vary a lot according to style, so feel free to create your own patterns. Now we move on to the fun part. Create a new layer and clip it. Lower the opacity down to 60% for now. Choose the fourth color and color the entire hair. Then switch over to the airbrush at stock settings and use the same transparent color erasing technique that we used in the previous step. Erase small pathways by following the flow of the hair. The main purpose of doing so is to create a sort of stylized ambient occlusion shadow that will bring out the three-dimensional form and volume of the hair. This gives the hair a soft and elevated feeling. If you're wondering which parts to erase and which parts to keep shaded, then think of the shadows as areas where the light doesn't reach the same intensity as with the unshaded parts. The parts that remain shaded will depend on the position of your light source, so be aware of this. You will need a bit of patience with this one, especially if the character you're working on has a lot of hair. But once you're finished with this, it'll be very worth it. We're almost done now, but there's still a couple of things left to do. Create a new layer and this time clip it to the line art that was used for the hair. Set the color picker to merged image mode or its equivalent in other software. Pick colors from both the shaded and unshaded areas of the hair and then slightly color the line art on the inside and outside. By doing this, the overall shading will blend in better as opposed to having the line art stick out in between the shadows. However, don't color the line art that hovers over the face, clothes and other darker areas. You avoid doing so to make sure that the overall shape of the hair remains visible and easier to distinguish. Afterwards, set the blend mode of the third shading layer to multiply and then change the opacity of the fourth shading layer down to 30%. Then, switch over to the highlights layer and with the airbrush at a relatively large size, gently erase over the outer parts of the highlight. With these corrections done and some other small corrections here and there, the shading is now complete.